The University of Minnesota Iranian Culture House presents Iranian Identity in Perspective by Professor Iraj Bashiri of the Department of History. Ancient sources on Iran outline the consecutive changes experienced by Iranian identity. Dr. Iraj Bashiri, Professor of History at the University of Minnesota, investigates these sources and presents them in a trilogy on the country. Ancient Iran, Cosmology, Mythology, History examines pre-Islamic times when Ahura Mazda ruled Iran through his holy immortals. Modern Iranian philosophy, from Ibn Sina to Mullah Sadra Shirazi, examines the philosophical underpinnings of Shi'ism that was launched in Iran in the 16th century. Modern Iran, Caliphs, Kings, and Jurisprudence brings the story of Iran's identity into contemporary times. It examines Iranian identity from the time of the Caliphs of Islam to the present. A summing up of the discussions in those volumes, the lecture provides a tunnel vision of Iranian identity. It investigates the processes that have transformed the leadership of Darius the Great under Ahura Mazda into the rulership of the 12th Imam under the auspices of Allah. It reveals that the core of Iran's identity, i.e., a community ruled by the dictates of a deity through a deputy, has not changed. What has changed, it shows, are the cultural and civilizational aspects of Iran's identity.
This lecture on Iranian identity is in 4 parts. Part 1 deals with identity itself and Iranian identity. Part 2 deals with the influence of Zoroastrianism on Islam, especially Shiite Islam. Part 3 deals with the terrestrial and celestial Mahdi. And Part 4 deals with the assault of secularism on Iran's religious institutions. Now, what is identity? By itself, identity is nothing but an empty vessel. Identity's aspects and modes determine its types and shape. Structurally, identity consists of a core and an other, with a capital O. The core consists of authority with a single source of inspiration or sources. Other consists of 2 layers, an abstract layer and a concrete layer. The abstract layer presents the cultural principles, while the concrete layer presents the apparent manifestations of the cultural principles here referred to as civilizational aspects. The core. Identity is an ever-changing phenomenon. It cannot be defined in general terms. In the case of Iran, for instance, we can distinguish a pre-Islamic identity and determine some of its features. In post-Islamic times, we can examine the Mongol and Safavid times for grounds for a possible change in the country's identity. To understand contemporary Iran, we can compare Iran's current Tawhidi Shi'ism with the cumulative effect of events on the culture over the centuries. The core in identity is the most important component. As the center organized by authority, it is instrumental in galvanizing the cultural principles. At the end, it determines the civilizational aspects of society. We can distinguish at least 5 constituents within the core. They are responsible for the major changes in identity. These constituents organized by authority are structure, function, expression, mode, and content. Different identities have different constituents. Now the other. Outside the core, authority organizes a set of contradictory abstract forces. They appear in pairs as faith and reason, knowledge and ignorance, war and peace, wealth and poverty, justice and injustice, and the like. The reference of these pairs, i.e., religion, education, politics, economics, and justice, respectively, are cultural principles. They serve as the base for other. Finally, the concrete civilizational aspects appear in clusters as expressions of the cultural principles. For instance, religion could be Islam, Sunni or Shi'i, Zoroastrianism, Christianity, Judaism, or Buddhism. Similarly, education could be religious, secular, Western, and the like. In this lecture, we shall concentrate on the core of Iran's identity. It's of great importance to note that the forces that project the cultural principles and the various aspects of civilization are subject to intensity. For instance, loss in intensity on the part of the education principle might result in gain in intensity on the part of superstition, religious eminence, and bigotry. Conversely, shift in intensity from faith to reason might result in gain in enlightenment in society. Now, formation of Iranian identity. Ancient Iranians considered their land immortal. In terms of duration, they divided its existence into three phases: cosmic, mythic, and historic. In what follows, we shall adhere to this tripartite division. We shall begin with Iranian cosmology. Cosmology is described as a system of scientific, philosophical, and speculative thought dealing with the origin, structure, and space-time relationships of the universe. Ancient Iranians attributed this to the time when gods ruled and when a prototype Iranian land known as Ariana was created. Since there existed no material substance in the cosmos, the gods were distinguished as mindsets or minu. Altogether, there were two mindsets: good thought, spentominu, and evil thought, angraminu. In a cosmic battle, good thought defeated evil thought and created a desirable dominion, Khashatravarya, a prototype kingdom starting with a sky made of shining metal. Water was created from the essence of the sky. Thereafter, the earth, plants, animals, and man were created, each from the essence of the one preceding. More importantly, Mazda, or good thoughts, created 6 archangels, Ameshaspantus, to safeguard the well-being of his kingdom. The archangels, too, were created sequentially and out of a void. In addition to the world outlined above and its archangels, the Creator also created a unifying force called the Far. The hierarchical nature of the Far required that, even though made from the same essence, creatures and values in the kingdom should be at variance. The one at the top of the hierarchy, the organizer, was recognized as the legitimate ruler. He received the most Far. Appearing at the crest of the historic age, Prophet Zoroaster reorganized and enhanced Mazda's cosmic design. Below Ahura Mazda, he placed 6 archangels, or spentas. They were created as equal forces. Below the archangels, he placed angels, or yazata. And below them, he placed the soul of the faithful, Faravash. In this way, the Creator that thus far had been exclusively in communication with archangels and angels became accessible to the ordinary people as well. Now, through the Ahuric order, ordinary people could communicate with the deity. Through the Mubads, the individual referred his supplications to the Farabashi. His Farabashi took the supplications to the appropriate Yazata. The Yazata took them to an appropriate Spenta. Ahura Mazda understood the supplications in his mind and acted as he wished. Additionally, by bestowing the Far, or symbol of legitimacy for rulership of Iran, to charismatic Gashtas, Zoroaster filled the vacuum of power that had been created after the disappearance of the mythical hero saints ending in Kai Khusro. From Gashtas, the Far moved to the house of Achaemenes. To complete the picture, Zoroaster created mutual understanding between the monarchs and a body of priests or Mubads, who continued to support the king as he himself had done. Both functions were duty-bound to serve Iran. Their duty was to provide security for the land and tranquility for the populace. At a very high level, ancient Iranian identity consists of Ahura Mazda's authority, which formed a sensitive call for Krum, and a diverse other, including a cultural principle that through the medium of the Far promoted good thought, good words, good deeds. Those cultural values then projected a civilizational aspect consisting, among other things, of a tribal people settling into a new and rapidly expanding nation, and a tolerant linguistic, ethnic, and religious aspect that sought promotion of the Iranian base, while allowing other ethnicities, languages, and ideologies room for growth. The visible aspects of this civilization could be seen in the Achaemenid military, with the immortals and phenomenal number of soldiers. It could also be seen in the deeds of its great monarchs in the form of qanats that dotted the landscape, as well as in the magnificent ceremonial palaces like Persepolis and the impressive tombs at Naqsh-e-Rustam. Achaemenid rulers were not only proud kings of Iran, but also esteemed pharaohs of Egypt. The canal that Pharaoh Darius dug in order to connect Egypt to Persia and India testifies to Iran's rapid rise amid the gradually disappearing powers of the time, to wit, Babylonia and Assyria. The hope of towering monarchs like Cyrus and Darius was that the identity they had received from the Creator, this land, Iran, with good people and good horses, would remain eternal, and that time and tide would not be able to upset or efface it. The significant fact about Iran's identity was the bond that existed between individual Iranians and the deity. The Farabashis, Yazatas, and Spentas served as intermediaries. They helped the helpless faithful receive a just hearing at the divine presence. This core identity became especially prominent and significant under the Sassanids, who paid special attention to the Far and the divine right of kings. Under the Sassanids, the Ahuric order served as both the spiritual fulcrum as well as the societal organizer of the Sassanid society. Now, influence of Zoroastrianism on Islam. In general, similarities and differences are a major feature of religions. For instance, Islam Zoroastrianism, Hinduism, and Buddhism all use the concept of dualism. Does that mean that dualism belongs to one of those religions and that that religion in turn has influenced the other religions? Certainly not. However, there are similarities that are consistent among religions that belong to the same geographical location. Under such circumstances, the chances are that one religion might influence another. For instance, Zoroastrianism predates Islam by many centuries, and Islam has been determined to displace Zoroastrianism. In that case, would we not expect Zoroastrianism to try to defend itself by repulsing and, if possible, reshaping Islam? In what follows, we shall show how Zoroastrianism might have influenced Islam in general. Later on, we shall demonstrate what might be the influence of Zoroastrianism on Shiite Islam. Let us begin with the sojourn of Ardavirov. In Zoroastrianism, there is an account about a fantastic journey to the heavens. The details are in the book called Ardavirov Nama, or the Book of Ardavirov. The story is as follows. A saintly priest, Ardavirov, in a trance induced by drugs, ascends to the heavens. There, guided by the angel Surush, his spirit is taken to the presence of the chief deity, or Maz, Ahura Mazda. After that, he pays visits to heaven and hell and purgatory. At the end, he is returned to his normal life on earth. During his meeting with Ormazd, he receives instruction that the faithful should pray 5 times a day. Now, compare that sojourn with the Iraj of Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad's night journey has 2 parts, Isra and Miraj. Here we concentrate on Miraj. In the Miraj story, one night, around the year 621 AD, Prophet Muhammad, riding the Buraq, a horse with human head and wings, ascends to the heavens. In the 7th heaven, he meets Allah. After that, he pays visits to heaven and hell. Before leaving, Allah instructs the Prophet that the faithful should pray 5 times a day. The bridge of the separator is another example. Both the Zoroastrians and Muslims believe in an afterlife. The Zoroastrians believe that in the afterlife, the soul is escorted by the angel Surush over the Chinavat bridge. This special bridge can be as narrow as the sharp edge of a sword for the evildoers and wide and passable for the pious. Similarly, Muslims believe that in the afterlife, the soul crosses the Sirat bridge. The circumstances of the bridge are the same as those described for the Chinavat bridge. There are also similarities in the performance of prayers. Zoroastrian believers are called to prayer by ringing a bell in the Temple of Fire. Yasna prayer is performed after that. This happens 5 times a day. The faithful are required to wash their hands and face before performing the Yasna. When performing Yasna, the faithful cover their heads, face a blazing fire, symbol of truth, and recite portions of the Avesta, the Gathas, in Avestan, the original language of its revelation. Muslims are called to Salat, prayer, by a Muazzin 5 times a day. They undergo required ritual purification, washing their face and limbs with water or sand. While praying, their heads are covered They stand facing the mihrab that indicates the Qibla, direction of the Kaaba, and recite verses from the Quran in Arabic, the language of its revelation. Those are just a few instances where Zoroastrianism has influenced Islam in general. The influence of Zoroastrianism on Shiite Islam is subtle and profound. In order to describe it, we need to contextualize the discussion with a brief history about the interaction between Muslims and Zoroastrians between 680 and 940 AD. At the time of his death, Prophet Muhammad did not have a son to follow him. Those responsible for determining the fate of the Islamic community decided on the caliphate of Abu Bakr, a companion of the Prophet. After Abu Bakr, two other caliphs, also not related to the Prophet, ruled. Eventually, Ali, cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet, became caliph. With Ali's caliphate, the special relationship that had existed between Allah and the Prophet was restored and reestablished. The community began to be guided by the individual who had been divinely chosen and who had divine knowledge regarding the rulership of the Ummah. Rather than as a caliph, Ali ruled as an imam. In the eyes of his followers, he was the legitimate successor of the Prophet. His rule was just and equitable, an example for the members of his dynasty of imams to follow. Unfortunately, Ali was murdered, and his followers, the supporters of the bloodline of the Prophet, could not keep the caliphate in the house of the Prophet. They separated themselves from the Sunnis, who considered the Quran and the Sunnah sufficient guidance for mankind to the end of time. After Ali, differences appeared that made the coming together of the two branches, Sunnites and Shiites, impossible. These differences appear in the fundamentals of the religion. Abstract in nature, the fundamentals of the Shiite faith are Tawheed, oneness of God, Nubuwwat, prophethood of Muhammad, Imamat, divine leadership of the Imam, Adl, justice of God, and Mu'ad, resurrection. Conversely, the pillars of the Sunni Sharia are faith, prayer, almsgiving, fasting, and Hajj. They all pertain to the practical aspect of life. The abstract versus practical aspects of the two religions are of profound importance. The Shiites tend to gravitate towards forces that connects them with Allah. Sunnites gravitate to the realities of tribal existence in harsh circumstances. Shiites believe that although prophethood ended with Muhammad, God's guidance of the community did not end. The Imams are sent by God to continue the guidance of the community. The Sunnites believe that the Quran and the Ahadith and the four schools of law suffice. The importance of the Imamate. Among the fundamentals listed above for Shiite Islam, Imamate is the most important principle. It is the single issue that clearly distinguishes the Shiite from the Sunnite. It states that there are 12 Imams. They are either appointed by Allah through the Prophet, for example, Ali, or are appointed by previous Imams. For the Shiites, the lives of the Imams are as sacred as the life of the Prophet. Their words and deeds are recorded as hadith and serve as a source of law for the Shiite community. A major contribution of the Imams to the Shiite community is their shifa'at, or intermediacy. They mediate the case of the faithful before Allah. Through the Imams, a line of communication exists between the faithful and the deity. Allah listens to the Imams more because they are His chosen appointees for the guidance of His subjects. How and when this line was established in the Shiite faith is not known, but there are certain events in the lives of the Imams that, if scrutinized, yield substantial clues. One such clue is embedded in the concept of the five of the cloak, Hajjtana al-Aba. Now, who are the five of the cloak? Imam Ali is the first Imam of the Shiites. After him, his older son Al-Hassan, and following him Al-Hussein, both from Fatima, became the second and third Imams, respectively. After the tragic death of Al-Hussein in Karbala, the only male heir left was Al-Hussein's son, Zain al-Abidin, from the daughter of the last Sassanid king, Yazdegerd III. In addition to Al-Hassan and Al-Hussein, Imam Ali had a son from a wife other than Fatima. His name is Muhammad ibn Hanafiya. After Al-Hussein's death, Muhammad ibn Hanafiya contested the imamate of Zain al-Abidin as the fourth Imam. He claimed to be the fourth Imam himself. The fact that Zain al-Abidin's mother was Iranian made matters more complicated. The details regarding the circumstances that brought this decision to the Shiite community at this time are not clear. It is also not clear whether those accompanying the daughter of Yazdegerd III had any influence in the matter. It is clear, however, that in order to resolve the problem posed by Muhammad ibn Hanafiya, the family of the prophets, or the Ahl al-Bayt, took refuge in a verse of the Quran. In that verse, Allah distinguishes Muhammad, Ali, Fatima, Hassan, and Hussein as the blessed family. Muhammad ibn Hanafiya is not included in the blessed family. From then on, Zain al-Abidin and his descendants were recognized as legitimate Imams. It is significant to note that although this decision was made on political grounds, in the end it received religious and spiritual value as well. More importantly, Shi'ism, that thus far had been a political issue, gained legitimacy as a divine mission, and Ali, its founder, was retroactively recognized as the head of the dynasty of Imams. Zain al-Abidin became the fourth Imam. More importantly, similar to the case of the archangels in Zoroastrianism, who were placed below Ahura Mazda by Zoroaster, the five of the cloak is given cosmic recognition. It forms the first tier in the formation of a future Shiite pantheon. The members of this tier, established directly below Allah, are the five of the cloak. Creation of the five of the cloak distinguished the divine rule of the Imams of the Shiites from the secular rule of the Sunni caliphs. It also limited and consolidated the rule of the Imams within the family of the Prophet. From here on, the Shiites accepted to abide by the unchangeable laws outlined by the Quran, the ahadith of the Prophet and Imams, and the dictates of reason. Their dynasty of Imams helped and guided the persecuted community. Now, the question of intermediacy. Recall that intermediacy was a feature added by Zoroaster when he reorganized the function of the spentas. His purpose was to create a channel of communication between the king and his subjects, on the one hand, and the king's subjects and the celestial beings communicating with Ahura Mazda, on the other hand. establishment of the five of the clock below Allah affords the Shiite Muslim the same ability. He can gravitate to Allah through the five of the clock. The 12th Imam. After the 4th Imam, matters for the family of the Prophet proceeded precariously. Most of the Imams were poisoned by the agents of the caliphs. The Shiites nevertheless stayed by their Imams. At the end, the oppression of the caliphs became so intense that there remained virtually no potential adult for the imamate in the family of the Prophet. Even the survival of the very young was threatened. Potential imams were mostly in their childhood days. The 10th and 11th Imam, therefore, prepared the ground for the occultation of the 12th Imam. Now, the era of the associates. The 12th Imam went into occultation for the first time in 873. He was 4 years old. This occultation, referred to as the lesser occultation, lasted 67 years. During the lesser occultation, 4 associates connected the Imam with the faithful. In 940, the Imam went on his greater occultation. Before leaving, he ordered his associate not to appoint an heir. 12 Shiites believe that one day the 12th Imam, accompanied by Jesus, will return and convert the world into the Shiite faith. Needless to say, after the occultation of the 12th Imam, the Shiite community was left without a divine leader. So now, what happened after the Mahdi? After the Mahdi, the Shiite community sanctified the rulership of the Imams to keep the imamate indefinitely in the family of the Prophet. It established the Immaculate 14, the Chardah Ma'asum, as a tier below the five of the cloak. The tier consists of 12 Imams, the Prophet, and Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet. The Immaculate 14 not only enhanced the line of the intermediaries between the faithful and the deity, but also assigned each Imam a particular miracle. For instance, the 8th Imam, Imam Rida, is recognized as the healer of the sick, protector of the weak, and supporter of the vulnerable in society. Imam Sadiq is a provider, especially gold from the earth. Imam Baqir heals the blind, and Imam Sajjad has the ability to disappear into thin air. Additionally, in the absence of a living Imam, the community established a Wali al-Faqih to see to the day-to-day affairs of the Ummah until the return of the 12th Imam. The position of the Wali al-Faqih devised at this time was not meant for one who could assume secular rulership. After the addition of the Immaculate 14, the configuration of the Shiite pantheon of Imams is complete. The contention here is that before the era of the Safavids, a type of popular orthodoxy existed in Iran. A real orthodoxy did not appear until the publication of Al-Asfar of Mullah Sadr Shirazi. This popular orthodoxy had other features as well. Over the centuries, the Yemenites, who had brought Shiism to Iran, helped by Iranian scholars, not only elevated the members of the house of the Prophet to the heavens, but also retained the concept of intermediacy, shafa'at, for them, and made them objects of worship. After all, the Imams had lived in this world and had tombs that worshippers could visit. The Wali Faqih was usually a prominent Muslim, knowledgeable about the Quran and the Ahadith of the Prophet and the Imams. After the fall of the Caliphate to the Mongols, 1258 AD, although the kings and sultans referred to themselves as Shadow of God or Zillullah, they generally attended to the secular affairs. Religious and judicial affairs were the responsibility of the Wali Faqih. This trend continued until the advent of the Safavids, when matters changed drastically. One of the main issues in the identity core is the question of the type of authority. If a deity exists in the core, how is authority delegated? In other words, the mode of governance becomes important. In ancient Iran, a hierarchy disseminated the fire judiciously, not necessarily equally, among all beings. Over the centuries, however, that system was ignored by the caliphs and nearly disappeared. The Sunni world, that is what Iranians were at the time, dealt with the deity directly. Unlike Christianity, where the clergy intermediates, Sunni Islam does not accept any intermediaries. Shiite Islam, as we have seen, does. This function, however, is not given to the clergy. It's a holy function in the domain of the imams. This is very similar to the role of the Mughals in ancient Iran. They did not communicate directly with Ahura Mazda either. They accomplished their mission through the intermediacy of the Ahuric order discussed earlier. During the rule of the Safavids and the Qajars, the ulama did not question the role of the king as shadow of God, nor did they see it appropriate for themselves to aspire to kingship. Matters continued in this vein until the rule of the last Pahlavi. During the latter part of the Pahlavi dynasty, the question of legitimacy in rulership of Iran takes the center stage. Who is the legitimate ruler? The deputy of a deity that no longer exists and is worshipped, or the deputy of an imam that is living in time? The imam is the Mahdi. We have talked about him before. Here we shall investigate the modes of his existence as interpreted by Shiite scholars, especially by Mullah Sadr Shirazi. Now, the role of the Mahdi, the terrestrial and the celestial Mahdi. During the Safavid era, Sadruddin Shirazi, usually referred to as Mullah Sadr, introduced an all-encompassing philosophy of existence and therein a philosophy of government. His thought on the subject was contested by his peers as well as by the Safavid court. His theory outlined in the four sojourns, the Asfar al-Arba'a, places God at the center. By analyzing the simple or basit and hidden or ghaibi aspects of the divine, he empowers the individual to reach the highest degree of intellect, aql, and return as a leader. Such a leader does not have to conquer land or be related in blood to a previous leader. The effort, in other words, is a single and singular event. Through his hierarchy of being, Sadr also shows how prophets transcend the levels of humanity, khiyal and aql, and reach the empyrean heights where they can hear the sound of the pens recording the fate of man. Similarly, how and why the imams who belong to the ranks below prophets must appear at various times to lead mankind out of ignorance. Before Mullah Sadra, Shiite eschatology was based on the justice of God. Theologians who identified God's justice with man's justice theorized that the Mahdi will appear to revenge the injustice inflicted upon the Ahlul Bayt, especially Al-Hussein. Their Mahdi lived in time and space and continues to live there until the amount of injustice becomes intolerable. Then he will strike out and root out evil. In other words, their Mahdi had a terrestrial orientation. Sadra's view differed drastically from the view of his predecessors and contemporaries. He considered matter, jamad, and soul, ruh, to be companions of the self, nafs. Nafs, as an intellect potential continuum, pre-exists the creation of both jamad and ruh. The trio experience a unique life in this world for an allotted amount of time. During this time, ruh and jamad become fused together. Nafs remains independent from the two. Nafs is not associated with matter in any way. On the hierarchy of wujud, the trio, jamad, ruh, and nafs undergo movement in essence, harakat jawhari. Movement in essence means that not only the physical, visible part of an object, but also its essence is subject to change. Thus, jamad becomes plant, plant becomes animal, and so forth. In the confines of this world, and within their allotted purpose, the three appear as a being at the lowest level of the hierarchy of existence. Movement in essence controls their movement and their progress towards their allotted destiny or their purpose. At the end of life, jamad dies. Ruh too, because of its association with matter, dies. Only nafs continues beyond the death of jamad and ruh and moves on to become associated with higher levels of aql, intellect. The aim of nafs is to cross all the levels of aql and reach supreme intellect, aql kul. Aql has many levels that nafs can cross. At each of these levels, nafs is transformed into the level of that particular aql, and at each level, the new nafs has the potential of repeating a new life with a different ruh and jamad combination. The possibility of this new life depends on the purpose assigned to the nafs. It also depends on the type of movement, in essence, that the new life is allowed to undergo. The companionship that happens at this level between aql on the one hand and the new jamad and ruh combination on the other hand is holy. It is a companionship blessed with a degree of divine love. Depending on the movement in essence and the purpose involved, the being would become a prophet or an imam. Sadra's Mahdi falls into this category of beings. He is a particular degree of aql accompanying a particular new combination of jamad and ruh. Jamad and ruh do not associate with aql. This being, Sadra protests, has the potential of leading mankind. He has reached this status with blessing from Allah, and he will be empowered by Allah to lead mankind on the right path. Needless to say, his leadership, being divine, automatically neutralizes all earthly or kain claims to rulership. In fact, that is where the Safavid kings and their supporters did not see eye to eye with Sadra, and that is also why Sadra had to spend a good part of his life in exile. Through his Tawhidi orthodoxy, Sadr advocated what he considered a correct means for the guidance of the community. Safavid kings, however, were seeking a means through which they could legitimize their rulership. They did not want to support a way of life that was equitable in nature, especially one that was perpetually in need of blessing by an imam or a deputy of imam. A rulership in post-Sadr times is derived from the intersection of the terrestrial part of Sadr's hierarchy, summed up in Insan, and the Immaculate 14, summed up in the Mahdi. Towards the end of the rule of the Qajars, the Usuli emerged and tried to revive the legitimacy of the role of the Imams as Allah's chosen for the education and salvation of mankind. The source of their inspiration was Mullah Sadra's interpretation of the appearance of the Mahdi. The beneficiary of this attempt, after decades of struggle, was Ayatollah Khomeini. Now moving to assault of secularism. To modernize Iran of the Qajars meant to give Iran a new character or a modern appearance so that the country and its people, institutions, and international relations could meet Western standards. In other words, it meant to influence Iran with ideas, customs, and practices characteristic of the Occident, leading to ideological and cultural changes. The ultimate goal, of course, was to secularize the country, i.e. create a milieu in which the Iranians would become indifferent to the sources of their identity, Islamic or Iranian. That would have been a government and a system of education devoid of any divine intervention. Princes who welcomed Marco Polo when he brought Lady Kokachin to marry a Persian prince, the Safavids who welcomed the Shirley brothers and made them ambassadors, and the Qajar Shahs who gave tobacco and oil concessions to Westerners were not familiar with the agents of the West and the secularizing effects of their contributions. Modernization is economically oriented with sociological ramifications. In the Iran of the Qajars, it tended to alter the individual's behavior, making him susceptible to un-Islamic acts, such as accepting the ownership of a house without asking why it is given to him, or becoming engaged in treason, thinking he is helping his nation. Westernization is sociologically oriented with economic ramifications. In the case of Iran of the Qajars, it tended to attract the individual's attention away from his Iranian identity and toward Western values. Rather than attending to religious ceremonies, the individual was likely to appear in bars and coffee houses. Secularism is community-oriented, with ramification for the individual and the community. The community as a whole may become indifferent to their traditional values, such as family and tribal honor. Men lose their sense of responsibility, and women their sense of correct behavior. For instance, they appear in public without the hijab and mingle with men. The individual or the community may become apostate. Although the concepts outlined above seem simple on the surface, in reality they are not. In fact, in their essence, they are drastically different from each other. The benefit rests in the fact that they can act in tandem. In other words, while individually they do not seem to harm anyone or anything, collectively they have the potential of changing the appearance orientation, and the sacred values of an individual or a community. Modernization, westernization, and secularization entail a re-examination of the traditional values, reorganization of age-old priorities, and possible loss of irreplaceable treasures. The individual or the community subjected to it is likely to fall victim to disillusionment. He might resort to drastic measures. In Qajar, Iran, secularism entailed changes that affected the clergy to the point that they issued fatwas against the monarch. Similarly, it affected the despotic rulers to the point that they were forced to relinquish power. The benefit for those who implemented the changes was that they could rearrange their priorities and consequently the balance of power among the contending factions created by their secularizing measures. The seeds of secularism were sown before the Kholistan and Turkmenchai treaties in the 19th century. It took almost a century before the manipulative arms of secularism that crippled the dynamics of Iranian society became partially visible. The population was polarized and supportive and oppositional groups were formed. The social and political atmosphere of the country too changed. Individuals and groups faced a choice between modernization and westernization on the one hand, and holding with dear life to their cherished traditional values on the other hand. Articles and books were written in support and opposition to each trend. We said that secularism tends to de-emphasize and, if possible, eliminate religion. It's not surprising, therefore, that all along the clergy were steadfastly against all new trends. They spoke about the harm of secularization and related those harms to modernization and westernization. In short, the clergy took a firm stand against the innovations. Around 1905 and 1916, Iran got a new neighbor, the communists. From then on, it would be incorrect to limit the West to Europe and Western ideology to democracy. It would be equally incorrect to ignore the egalitarian voices arriving from the Soviet Union in Azerbaijan and echoing throughout the North. As history shows, Soviet agents lived among Iranian populations and manipulated people's ideologies to fit communist diktat. During the Pahlavis, therefore, we have to view Iran as a major source of fossil fuel in both the south and the north, and a lucrative market for European and Soviet goods. It's natural, therefore, for those forces to come into a major clash regarding how to democratize or Sovietize Iran, respectively. It is also important to note that both contenders, the British and the Soviets, arrived in Iran with a full understanding of the Iranian culture and literature, as well as how to harmonize their Western ways with the Shiite realities on the ground. The Soviets were more successful because their target was the hearts and minds of the Iranians. The Americans arrived in full force after World War II. They were quite unprepared to meet the challenges of the 1960s Iran, yet they had to defend their interests against the Soviets and the Shiite clergy, both enemies of the British in the past and now enemies of the United States. All the Soviets and the British needed to do for the United States to revisit Vietnam in Iran was to persuade the Shah to implement an un-Islamic act, an act such as land reform. Surprisingly, the Shah, against all ancient wisdom, not only accepted, but did it. He ignored the fact that the clergy had fought against land reform throughout their existence in Iran. Secularism moved quite slowly but steadily in Iran. During the Qajars, modernization robbed the country of a good portion of its territory, mineral resources, and cash. قائم مقام فراهانی, Mirza Taghi Khan Amir Kabir, and Jamaluddin al-Afghani, who dared to question the wisdom of the Shahs, were silenced. Modernization changed to westernization under Reza Shah, an agent of the British. He settled the tribes in the south so oil operations could proceed smoothly. He then opened the way for British goods, cars, radios, hats, suits, as well as movies, telegraph and telephone lines to flow into the country. He also allowed Iran's carpets, dried foods, antiques, as well as natural gas and oil to be exported. Additionally, Reza Shah divested many landowners, some of them clergy, of their land and closed all maktabs and madrasas. More importantly, he assaulted the honor of the nation through forced unveiling of women, kashfi hijab, and soiled the harem of Shah Abdul Azim with the soles of his boots. Mohammad Reza Shah tried to finalize the secularization of Iran. After receiving an emergency grant of $45 million, he allowed the Seven Sisters cartel to take control of the Iranian oil industry. The funds were divided as follows: 10 million for essential imports, 10 million to bolster Iranian currency, 12 million to avert a sugar famine, and 13 million to finance other necessary purchases. He also received 23 million annually as 0.48. The corruption that the expenditure of that money spawned, i.e. coronations, 2500th anniversary of monarchy, and the White Revolution, robbed Iran of its traditional sources of revenue and innovation, in some on the verge of being transformed into a secularist nation. Iran became a dependent nation, dependent politically, socially, technologically, and militarily. As can be seen, Reza Shah's lack of knowledge of Iran's changing identity put his rulership, as well as the rulership of his dynasty, in jeopardy. The ancient divine right of kings to which he was led was in reality nothing but an empty shell. Over the centuries, it had lost its ancient organizing power. Astutely enough, as we have seen, Khomeini's predecessors retained Iran's divine identity, kept it hidden, however, until it could be used as the organizing fulcrum of the country once again. Now, Iranian identity today. The institution of the Wali Faqih assures that the authority core in Iranian identity remains as it had been from the beginning, bar the eras of the caliphs and the Mongols. Although the nature of authority has not changed, the mode of the forces that shape its principles and which project its cultural and civilizational aspects have. The new authority envisages a global hold for Shiite Islam as opposed to the ancient authority that wanted prosperity for Iran, a land with good people and good horses, under Ahura Mazda. The new authority also envisages a community of believers that does not recognize any borders, spelled out into the other, it means that the culture of future Iran strives to export its Shiite values worldwide. Consequently, its civilization will support only those cultural principles that are derived from the Quran and the Ahadith of the Prophet of Islam and the Ma'soom. Although logically and theoretically the culture and the civilization outlined above should be accommodating, it is not. Its emphasis on the particularity of Shi'ism has a fragmenting effect. The population has fallen victim to sectarian and regional disputes, distrust of authority, and constant ethnic conflict. Furthermore, the divisions are pronounced. Different segments of the population attend different mosques, perform different rituals, listen to different preachers, and form different alliances. Put differently, a Sunni Iranian from Balochistan is likely to shun a 12er Shiite from Isfahan, or an Ismaili Shiite, or a Baha'i, or a Sufi. This is to leave out minorities like the Zoroastrians, Jews, and Christians. Present-day Iranian communities do not participate in each other's ceremonies, attend each other's wakes, or choose a husband or a wife from among their members, as they used to do in the past. If their paths cross, depending on circumstances, they will not hesitate to impose their ideological will on each other, even if it entails suppression of rights. This is to ignore the fact that millions of Iranians in the diaspora are summarily relegated to Taghut, and that the country itself has become a pariah. This state of affairs, the secular Iranians believe, would not have happened if Islamic radicals had not disrupted their peaceful community. But the Islamic radicals are not the only ones to blame. The secular Iranians blame themselves even more. They feel guilty, for then as now, they did not stand up for their rights, and for allowing the resources of the country to be exported without their knowledge and permission. For some, this feeling of intense guilt is accentuated by the shame of the inability to rise above their dependence and poverty in order to assist their mothers and daughters that are treated roughly and inappropriately by the Arabs in the Emirates of the Persian Gulf. More than anything, however, Iranian intellectuals resent that the uneducated Shiite elites, rather than qualified individuals from among themselves, should control the internal, external, and socio-cultural affairs of the Republic. The narratives for the Shiite elite describes a group that is cut from a totally different cloth. They are mostly educated young and middle-aged men who seek to forge a new identity for their Islamic homeland. They frequent the same Islamic gatherings, listen to the same set of speeches, and promote the same set of values. More importantly, as long as the march to the ultimate utopia is not halted, they would follow Imam Khomeini and Ayatollah Khamenei to the ends of the earth. The new identity they intend to forge for Iran employs the divine institutions that have been carved out of the Quran and the Ahadith of the Prophet and the Ma'soom, based on sound Islamic cultural principles. Those principles, they believe, will create a lasting bond among the present-day disparate groups. Having formed a theoretic regime following his will, they await the coming of the true authority himself, the 12th Imam. In sum, the people of Iran are undergoing a traumatic time in their history, not because of who they are, but because of the circumstances in which they have placed themselves. Circumstances that now are beyond their control. Insecurity, feeling of alienation, distrust, and guilt are normal feelings for individuals or collectives that undergo redefinition. Unfortunately, intense as these feelings are, they are compounded by the incredible goals set by the current authority. These goals include, but are not limited to, the following: adherence to the rulership of the 12th Imam through his deputy, following the Sharia as set forth in the Quran and gear all legislation to it, disregard all current political borders created by the self-serving tyrants, and create out of Iran an Islamic showcase that would eventually cover the entire globe. These goals, meritorious as they seem, are riddled with problems. For instance, creating a showcase of Islam out of Saudi Arabia, bar its Wahhabi affiliation, makes sense. Over 85% of the Muslims of the world would emulate such a showcase. Iran, on the other hand, is a country deeply entrenched in its own identity. Its imams and their cosmic structure, even at the center of the Tawhidi world, excluded from acceptance by the Muslim majority. Similarly, eliminating all the political borders created by tyrants is admirable, but that too is beyond Iran's means. But none of those problems have prevented Iran from reshaping its educational system and changing the dynamics of its economy or the goals of its military. The latter is enhanced at the expense of the Iranian poor, whose oil wealth is spent in Syria and Yemen. Depending on the outcome of the interaction between authority and the templates of other, and granted that there would be no setbacks in the country's global affairs, in time we might witness a stronger Perso-Islamic paradigm for Iran. Contributors to it would include Iranian nationalism, Shiite spirituality, and the democratic institutions of the West. Thank you.